Hello, guys. What is up? Welcome to another episode of No Cap Podcast, where we talk all things Valorant. Today, I am blessed with the first ever recurring guest here. We've got Dream, the coach of Cloud9 White. We love talking about the game. We did the first episode together, and we kind of broke down Astra when she first launched, what our thoughts on the meta were, and I think we kind of nailed it. I think we both feel that way. We're a little proud.
Agreed. Yeah,
No
yeah.
guarantees on how we do this time, but we figured we would take a shot at the KO and patch 3.0 meta and kind of talk all about that. That's all this episode's mostly about. So anyway, Cloud9 White Coach Dream just qualified for Game Changers 2. Congratulations. How are you doing?
Thanks, man. Doing good. I am really excited about KO as an agent, and what these changes mean for the game, and what it means about Riot's approach to balancing the game, and all sorts of stuff. So this is basically good news across the board. In my opinion, obviously there will probably have to be some adjustments, right? Nothing's going to be absolutely perfect out of the gate, but I really love where Riot is taking the game and what this kind of tells us about their philosophy on the game going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're clearly working hard. They're clearly being pretty observant to how their meta ends up playing out and making sure it remains dynamic, throughout one esports year. I think they're very conscious of shifting the pace and keeping things spicy, and hopefully not going too overboard while they do that.
We'll see. We'll see.
Exactly. Yeah, so I guess, I think a good place to start is talking about KO. What are your first impressions? Just blanket impressions.
Really cool agent. I like how interactive the agent is to play for yourself. Maybe not as fun to be on the receiving end of, for sure. But thematically, I think it's cool. General, like kind of visually and aesthetically, right? Like all that stuff. I like the big beefy, Terminator robot kind of like walking at you type character. That's a great thing to have in the game. I also am a fan of the general, like, we're gonna disable some utility, we're gonna have flashes, we're gonna entry and take fights. I like that as well. Yeah, I mean, I definitely like it. I think the kit is maybe a little overloaded. Maybe can do a little too much and can do a couple of those things too easily, but I do think it's a really cool design, and with a little changes that it'll be a good thing. I think KO's going to be good in this game for a long time unless they really, really gut him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we can get more into talking about his kit. As a quick disclaimer to everybody, we're going to be talking a lot about patch 3.0, right? This is the patch that drops on, Tuesday, the 22nd, tomorrow morning, from when we're recording this. And it's a huge patch. There's tons and tons of changes, right? The devs have even memed about it being like this tome of like, here comes the patch 3.0 notes. They're not published yet, so I just want to disclaim to everybody, most of what we're talking about is Dream and I have had access to the kind of preview event because we're part of teams that are in VCT. And, between our own diligence with testing the game out and things that other people have found and tested, that's most of our understanding of the patch. It technically could end up different tomorrow, and we could have technically missed things or been wrong about things, but I think, I just want to get that out there. But we're pretty confident, I think, with the changes we know about. And at least we have more than the trailer to go off of, because that KO trailer was immensely confusing. I was trying to figure out the character's abilities while there was like this Groundhog Day sequence where at some point he needlessly failed to like jump over a Cypher trip, and then there was another CGI sequence where he got sent to hell where he ran into Reyna and then returned. One of my players was like, so wait, can he like go into a dark reality with and like put an enemy agent? I was like, nope, I don't know what to tell you about that one.
Yeah, I feel like like we're gonna get more info on what the weird parts of that trailer were when we get like whatever the big like episode 3 cinematic is that we're gonna get. I assume that it will give us more info on KO a little bit and explain what that is. It seems like it's some sort of thing because he wants to like exterminate the Radiants. He wants to kill all the Radiants, and he sees Reyna there, right? And it's like a nuke and like the end of the world. So it seems like he's like a computer with a vision that Radiants are going to bring about the end of the world, so he has to kill all of them. That's my guess. But we'll see. I'm sure they'll elaborate on it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure, and I don't know how much I'll bother trying to follow their elaboration. I'm not well versed in the lore. It seems like Riot's actually even successfully attempting to create this like dual universe thing to put into lore the fact that these agents are fighting each other, which is ambitious and impressive, but it makes it
which does I mean tell us that they don't ever envision this game getting to a point where you're only allowed to have an agent on one team.
That's a good
like
point.
Like League of Legends, right? They are pretty committed. They would have to do some weird shit where like the alternate reality gets defeated and is gone now or something, which still wouldn't allow them to explain why people that were on the same side now would be on opposite teams from each other, right? So
that's a good point.
I think that is another thing that kind of gives us a little insight, even if there ends up being a bigger agent draft phase brought into the game. It seems like that would only be related to bans, not really picking an agent away from your opponent the way that happens in League. So also something that I like to see. I think even though there are abilities to create some parity within duelists or within initiators, within controllers, there are some maps where like if I'm playing someone on Icebox and they can have Viper and I can't, I'm kind of mad about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie. So I think that's hopefully will end up being a good thing.
Yeah, and obviously easier to balance a game when you don't have asymmetrical sides. So I like that we're using the lore to inform our long-term speculations about the game's format. That's how hardcore Dream and I go with our guessing. But yeah, I guess let's get into talking KO, and then we can kind of just run through his maybe we just talk about his abilities one by one. I'll do them, I think, in order that they're displayed on the game, which is we've got the nade, which is titled Frag/Men. I guess we'll just call it Frag. It's kind of a grenade, right? But it's kind of a molly. It's not a Viper.
It's a hybrid.
Yeah, and you kind of throw this nade. I'm gonna explain it in case people listening or watching haven't watched the trailer. He basically throws a grenade. It goes pretty far. I think you can kind of do set mollies with it from pretty far across the map. Maybe not quite the Viper distance, but it lands and then it sort of pulses for, I think it's like 5 seconds or so. I don't have the exact duration. And if you're in the center of the pulse when it pulses, it deals like 60 damage, I think. I think I tested it. And I think if you're all the way at the outside, it deals 30, but I might be wrong about that.
It's like 30, 35. I think it's hard to like make sure you're pixel perfect on the edge, but it's definitely around there somewhere. And I know it does 4 pulses.
4, okay.
So I don't know if that's over 4 seconds or 4.5 seconds or 5 seconds or 3.5 seconds, whatever. It's in that ballpark. Yeah. So it does kind of force you to get out of there, because if you take two pulses near the center of that, you're looking pretty rough, right? So you got to move real quick when you see it coming in. It does not work like a molly in the sense of it does get blocked by structures and corners and stuff, right? Where if I throw a Killjoy molly behind a box and then I pop it, the particles on the other side of the box are still doing damage, right? Same thing with a Phoenix molly, right? With a Viper molly, it literally will do damage through a wall. This does get LOS checked like a Raze nade does.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of element of it being a hybrid. So I do like that it doesn't damage through walls. That's not a mechanic that I'm a big fan of regardless. And I think with this character as well, you still see the particles through the walls, but it doesn't do damage. That's definitely not intuitive and not great in my opinion. But overall, pretty solid ability. When you look at other initiators, right? Like Breach has his boom thing, and Sova has shock darts, right? Kind of just an area denial sort of tool. Pretty strong within that class, I would say. One of the good ones.
And that's a good point, that these initiators have usually a clear ability that tends to not be incredible stall. Like, you can't, they're not a Viper or Brim Maul. You don't throw it at a choke to stop people from coming in for 6 or 7 seconds, but you throw it in one spot, and if somebody is in that spot, they have to move out of it. And I think it falls into that territory. I think it would be, it's not, you maybe coupled with other post plant mollies and that kind of meta, it's strong, but it's not like a Viper molly where it's just on a spike and you're just like doomed for 7 seconds and you're vulnerable. But definitely throw it in a corner to clear that corner. Throw it in line in the A main area of ascent. They gotta leave if they're there.
Yeah, just eliminating angles like you would want an initiator to have tools to do. And it does seem like it's not going to be able to be too abusive, like we've talked about, not a super long duration. And it can't be used in some of these cheesy ways through walls. So I'm a fan of this ability. Definitely think it's in a good place, not overtuned, does what it should.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Definitely.
And you got to throw it. It can bounce a little bit, so you can have lineups. You can do arcs. There can be fun setups where I think like Breach, for example, his is a little less interactive, a little less fun, right?
Yeah, so definitely.
I like that ability for sure.
Yep, I agree. In a vacuum, totally fine with it. We'll get to my larger thoughts on his kit later, but both of our thoughts. But yep, thumbs up for the frag. Even a little bit weak in my opinion, but I think that's good for an initiator. And then I guess next up it would be his flash. I don't know what the name of it is called technically, but it's 250 credits. For all you out there, we'll get to bigger patch notes, but every flash is now 250 credits, ignoring the Omen flash. What do you think of the flash? First thoughts?
Because of the flash changes, the best flash in the game when we're not counting things that blind you, right? Which would be like Omen and Reyna. We can talk about when their abilities are strong now with the flash changes. But basically, for people who don't know what the flash changes are on a broader scale, they're all more expensive at 250, right? But they also are much less effective. You are almost not flashed at all when the flash is behind you. So that means you can turn away from a flash. You can play anti-flash for your teammates better, and also to engage with a flash, it can be very good to throw the flash behind you and then entry forwards, because your opponents cannot look forward towards you because they will get full flashed and you will get flashed for, it feels like, I don't know, 15 hundredths of a second or something. Like
it's tiny.
A very short amount of time.
Pretty much entirely irrelevant amount of time. Like if you're not looking at a flash, what it does to your screen is irrelevant to your gameplay.
There's a very tight timing where anything relevant could happen at all. It's functionally not happening at all. So his kind of the trajectory of his flash, right, and the short fuse on the right click of his flash, right, it pops after 1 second in the air. His left click, which is like, the underhanded throw that a lot of agents have for their alt fires on various abilities. Same with his left click, right? It's just kind of a regular throw, a toss, a little more distance, also longer fuse time, 1.6 seconds. But basically kind of how it bounces, how it moves makes it very, very easy to set up those pop flashes and to throw it and just run out and have it pop behind you and really take a lot of space. So when you compare it to Skye and Breach, who Skye can play a little bit more off of her flashes now in the past, and then Breach, who I believe pulls his gun out a little bit quicker. It's kind of hard to tell. I'm not 100% positive on that after using flash, but he is definitely the initiator that has the most agency when it comes to playing off of his own flashes and being able to be a playmaker strictly for himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think for anyone who's played Counter-Strike, they're the Counter-Strike Flash. I agree. You can play make very easily. You can swing in front of it, like you said. These fuses are not attached to how it bounces. So if you left click, I think it's a harder throw with 1.6 second fuse, and I think if you right click, you kind of underhand it with a 1 second fuse. But other than that, they can bounce wherever they bounce once. It's not related to when they pop. You can swing in front of it, right? Exactly. If it pops behind you, it's not really a problem anymore. It's not going to mess up the fight you're taking. And I think the only other two perfect pop flashes in the game, well, there were three. There was, if you throw a perfect Phoenix curveball and it comes right around a corner, that's pretty good, but it can only be at one height, and the Phoenix has to be up in the corner. A Skye can do a pretty quick bird that pops right around a corner, but you have to fly it up and make sound, and I do think there's a little bit more of a delay on the bird popping, as well as it's just significantly harder to throw a perfect bird than anything else, because it's not a lineup, it's just timing. You're trying to watch the bird and time it perfect. And I tested it with my team, trying to do perfect bird pop flashes around corners in the new patch. It's pretty hard, because it kind of, after it appears, you hit pop and it takes sort of a second to explode. So and then there are Yoru perfect pops, but they're extremely loud, right? There's this weird squishy sound. Right, his flashes, you can have lineups. So for people who didn't play competitive Counter-Strike, a lot of Counter-Strike players had lineups for flashes. You crouch here and aim here and do a left click throw, and that it will perfectly pop, basically pixels around the corner, blinding anyone on that angle. There's no way they can turn. They pretty much don't even see a flash, right? It's just they're suddenly blind. You can do that with him. I think they might make a tiny noise, but it's pretty hard to hear.
It's pretty hard to hear. You can technically hear it, but unless you are very close to where that's about to pop and you have extremely good reactions, it's going to be very, very hard.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. So his flash, very sweet, very strong. He gets 2 of them. Best flash in the game, I think is fair to say.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Strictly because of the changes, right? If he had come out before those flash changes, it's still a strong flash, but it's not just the clear candidate for best in the game, right? But now it's pretty hard to argue against.
Yeah, totally. And then his next ability, I'm gonna have to take a deep breath for this one. It's called 0 Point. This is his signature ability, so it's the one that he gets for free. It regenerates every 40 seconds. It's basically this knife that he throws pretty quickly. You can't really arc it. You can't really add a bounce. I mean, you could shoot it in the sky. It's going to take 8 seconds to land because he's got his strong robo arm. He gives it a good chuck. But it has the new mechanic that kind of Chaos brought into the game, which is suppression, basically meaning, he throws this, and if it hits you, you are suppressed. You cannot use abilities for 8 seconds. So this thing's pretty insane. It's you throw it, it goes through walls, so it hurts you. It suppresses you even through a wall. It has a very large radius. It's basically this large dome. We tried testing it. It's kind of around the size of a Skye heel on the map. Trying to think of another way to. What's a good reference point for his knife?
It's 15 meters in radius, which is when, for example, a lot of guns start having their first fall off, right? Yeah. So like the Phantom, if you're under 15 meters, right, your headshot will one-shot someone with full armor. But if you're at 15.1 meters, you do the classic Phantom 140.
Yeah.
Right. So that gives you an idea. Skye's heal on live is 18 meters, I believe, right around that area, and then the heal is 15. So pretty big because it is a sphere. And it, again, like you said, the suppress effect, which works just like a silence from a MOBA game, right? You just can't use any abilities. Does go through walls. So it is breakable like a Sova dart, and there's a bit of a delay before that radius pulses, also like a Sova dart, but you don't have to be in LOS. I can throw it on my side of a wall where you are not able to break it, no matter how long the delay is. and you're just going to get hit by it. So
Yes.
the fact that it goes through walls, I think, makes it very, very good at totally eliminating one area of a site or an extremity that you would want to fight for, right?
And one like big area, like as a point of reference for people, you can, let's say you're attacking A on ascent, you can throw the knife at the front of the green box, the double box is in the middle of the site, and it pretty much gets everything. It gets hell, it gets behind the green box, it gets all the area around generator, and if they're up in heaven, and I think if they're up in the top right box, if you're attacking, it kind of covers all of that. And it does have a 0.6 second amount of time before it pops, but it's so large that in most positions you can't move away from it. And another, crazy part about this ability is, well, first of all, you can't suppress your teammates. There's no friendly fire there, or yourself as KO, and it notifies you who is suppressed on the other team.
Yes.
So even Killjoy ult is like 2 players detained. This is like the Sage, Sova, and Omen are all suppressed. And as a final kind of thing, its verticality is very large too. It's this basically giant sphere, so it's, you could land at the top of B main on ascent on the roof, and it will go all the way underneath. So I think this is probably the best ability the game's ever seen, personally. It feels
non-ultimate. Because we still have to talk about
we still have to talk about his ultimate. That's true. But even when you put ultimates in a pile, that ability is holding its own quite nicely in a competition, and it feels like they designed this thing, and then there's overtuned. Like, it doesn't feel like it's supposed to go through walls. It's like a recon dart. It's a strange feeling. And I'm getting excited talking about it because I think it's way too crazy. It doesn't quite feel like it should give such insane info. And I think 8 seconds is an enormously long amount of time to be unable to use an ability. It's super punishing. Yeah. So I think it's crazy overtuned. Probably the best ability in the game, maybe except for his ult. There's a couple other ults that I think could hold their own next to this ability. It's free. You get it every 40 seconds.
Yes.
I'll try not to get too excited about where I think it will take the meta, because that's a bigger conversation we're going to get to. But yeah, what are your kind of encapsulating thoughts on it, Dream?
I mean, definitely very broken. Definitely agree. It is the keystone of his kit. I think he's coming in as the strongest agent the game has ever seen. I think this is the strongest, non-ultimate ability the game has ever seen.
Yeah.
And I really don't think it's particularly close. As someone that's like been, playing League since season 1, just for like a Riot reference, this, not necessarily strength wise, but just kind of jack of all trades, just such a versatile character thing. This reminds me a little bit of Thresh on release, where he just can do so many things so well and just seems so broken, right? And how the kit is just so overloaded.
Yeah.
And I do think that when we look at the agents that shipped with the game, and then the agents that we've been getting over time, obviously Reyna, I think, did not have a super overloaded kit, but I think Skye's kit is a little overloaded. Abilities that do a bunch of different things that are very versatile, right? I think Astra's pretty overloaded, functionality wise. And then I think obviously KO is, right? Like poor Brimstone.
Yeah, seriously.
Just like the simplest character you could possibly think of, and then you've got people who have like abilities that do 3-4 things. Pretty soon we're gonna have like the version of Aphelios where you have to you have to spend 20 minutes just reading what their abilities do just to play against them. But yeah, I mean, definitely a really strong ability, really versatile. I like the fact that it tells you who it hits. I think that's an interesting strength of the ability, especially when he's supposed to be an initiator. He's supposed to be able to get you some of that information, right? So I like that. I think that's okay. I think they should keep that if they end up needing to hit the ability, which we think they will. I think they should look at other things like the duration of the suppress, for example, would be a big thing I go for. I do think when comparing it to a recon dart, the one interesting thing to bring up is obviously, even though it can go through walls, you are gonna, in a lot of situations, want to have sight of where you want the knife to land.
Yes.
Throwing the knife in the air for a lineup will obviously be doable in certain situations, but it's going to be a lot less practical than having a Sova dart lineup, right?
To land. So, you know, unless you're kind of aggressing on a very still team, it's going to be hard to kind of find value throwing these knives. I've tried, I found a set knife from outside A main to B main, so you can help your attackers take B main on ascent. It's like 7. It's like a mail order. You'll see it in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And they're very loud as they come down as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. And if you know where they're going and, you know, they have this long trigger time, it's definitely breakable. So I think that will be a less common use of the knife. And I cannot confirm this, but what I was told by some lineup geeks is that the knife trajectory matches a 2-charge Sova arrow.
Interesting. Okay.
Which can give you guys an idea of if you go into a server and you shoot a 2-charge Sova arrow straight up in the air with no bounces to try and land it somewhere, it takes a while to land. So just to kind of put that in context, like time-wise for you guys.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of context, a little more without, I'm trying not to, I'm sorry guys if it's feeling like this is the knife podcast, the KO knife podcast, but we will get to a lot of stuff, but this is important. This is a pretty meta defining ability. Just speed run for people who have questions. How would it work? We've tested it pretty rigorously. They've talked a lot about it. You cannot throw a knife at Cypher trips or Killjoy mollies to disable them. If you do throw a knife at a Cypher or Killjoy, for example, and silence them, then their gadgets, wherever they are, will turn off. If you throw it at an Astra, she cannot use her stars wherever they are because she is silenced. Other little cases, funny examples, if a Sova is droning or a Skye is using her dog, and you throw the knife and hit that agent, the drone or dog will just poof. You can throw it at a Viper, and I believe it makes her walls turn off, but not her ult. You cannot have a Viper shoot a molly and then throw a knife at her and have the molly that's already splatted turn off. What other examples are there that could be useful? Let's see. You could... if a Jett gets hit while she's ulted with her knives, she can't use them temporarily. If a Raze gets hit while she has her rocket out, it gets put away, and it also kind of usually ends by the time... her ult's usually expired by the time the knife is expired, so it basically removes her ult. You can interrupt a Sova ult with it. So there's kind of a pattern there that if it's an ability that is used and then it does its own thing and you no longer have control, you cannot remove that from somebody. If it's ability that somebody continues to control, like a rocket, Sova ult, drone, you can remove that. And you can temporarily disable Sentinel gadgets if you hit the Sentinel. So
yeah,
there's
it's all based only on if an agent is hit. Yeah. Not based on anything about where utility is, and it's only things that the agent still has some interactivity or control over. Yeah. That's it. So like Skye, for example, if you throw your bird out and you get hit, you can no longer control your bird's pathing or pop the bird, right? Or like you talked about with Jett, she has to put her knives away. Unlike Raze, her ult doesn't have a time limit, so once the suppress is over, she can take them back out. She also cannot hover while she has been hit by the knife, right? So I mean, I don't know how often that is super relevant, but certainly if you have like, I don't know, our players have some specific jump dash escapes from certain spots that require floating at the end. So if you knife where they're going to be and they dash into it, now they can't float and get to the spot where they want to be. I mean, I guess situations like that, but basically anything that requires further input, further control from the agent that's suppressed, they just can't do.
Yeah, exactly. And on the Jett topic, I saw a tweet from, I believe it was Nerfed of Soar Gaming in NA, who had thrown a a KO knife, and it hit a Jett who was floating in the air with her knives out, and she just fell from the sky with a classic in her hand. And I cannot describe how satisfying that sounds, and it makes me want to never ask this ability to get nerfed because I'm happy to see that happen to a Jett.
I mean, hey, if they nerf the duration, that Jett still dies, brother.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah. Yeah, I guess the last ability left here is the ult, which, I'll let you introduce. I can tell you're excited about it.
Yeah, easily the best ultimate in the game. But basically the way it works is the robot KO goes full on kind of Terminator mode. All right, his face gets like the crazy X on. I mean, his face, it's like a LED panel, but it gets like a crazy X. He looks all intimidating. He does a little animation. He pumps his fist together. He's about to go fuck stuff up. You know what I mean? But the big impact is he gets a very large, constantly pulsing radius of suppression. Yeah. And when I say very large, I mean it like the size of a Killjoy ultimate.
Yeah, I was about to say
covering an entire site. Yeah. Okay. And these pulses, when you get hit, they don't suppress you for 8 seconds the way the knife does. I think they suppress you for about 3 seconds. Yeah. Or maybe it's 4, but the next pulse will hit you before the suppression ends. So if you are within the radius, you are just permanently suppressed during the duration of the ult. Again, goes through walls, does not need a LOS check, turns off all your ability to use or control your utility. He also gets a 30% fire rate buff, the same buff that Reyna ult gets and the same buff that Stimpack gives, right? Which is very powerful. Yeah. And he additionally does not die when he takes 150 damage. He gets knocked the way you would in a BR, where you can get picked back up, right? And while you are knocked, you can't move or really look around. You can see in the direction you were looking. You do have a little bit of info you can provide. But the important part is while you are down, you have 15 seconds before you fully die. A teammate can come pick you up. They can also just like tap over and over on you like they tap a bomb, and that will make you be able to get stalled out for 30 seconds, which is maybe something they should look into. Maybe it shouldn't work that way, but you have 850 health while down. You cannot be headshot, and you are there for 15 seconds. If there is ever another person near this downed KO, you cannot take the time to address the downed KO. It takes so long to kill them. I don't care if they're vulnerable. It doesn't matter. It takes way too long to kill them. You have to kill everyone else, then deal with the KO, or just keep them away from being able to pick up the KO. You are not eliminating the KO manually in this instance, right? It's just not happening. It's just very good. Strong. Yep. There will be some interesting elements going on where, similar to like a 2v2 late round where people are like tapping the bomb to bait people to come out. It makes a noise when you start to revive him. So you can like tap it real quick to like get people to come out to have to peek you so you can't get the revive type thing. So there will be some interesting gameplay elements there for sure. But overall, not a super interactive ability. No. Really just takes away everyone's agency in a giant section of the map. Yeah. Gives you a buff to your fire rate. You can still use your flashes. Your teammates can still use all their abilities. Just makes you you do get that sort of Terminator Juggernaut power fantasy where no one can do anything against you and you have the better gun, and even if you get knocked down, you get to come back. So thematically, I think it fits. I just think some elements of it are maybe a little too strong. But definitely a very, very good ability. It's a 7 cost, not an 8 cost, which became a thing this patch. Yeah. I think it's the best ultimate in the game. I agree. The fact that it doesn't come out at that 8 cost when we have things like, Raze ult, Sage ult,
Sova.
and Sova ult at 8 cost. That's a little questionable to
Yeah.
me. So they're either, I think it would make sense to even up the cost and still reduce the strength of the ultimate a little bit. Because I just feel like it should be a free round win. That is the strength of this ability.
I completely agree. And let's see, it doesn't give you information if somebody's suppressed, but
sure.
So just like the knife, but that's, who cares, because you're just running in and committing the round anyway, because you're just silencing everything, right? And it lasts, I'm trying to think of anything we miss. It lasts 10 seconds. No matter when you get downed, you have 15 seconds, whether it was at the last second or not, and it takes 3 seconds to revive it. Yeah, it's crazy. It's completely crazy. It sounded funny when you were going through the summary, and you're like, yeah, combat stims, and it does this pulsing 10-second suppression. Oh, and you also can't die. Like, it's just like, what? You're right, it does do the Terminator fantasy, but it's also, you don't even have to aggress or move with it. You could just pop it while you're playing a post plant and just stand there. And
they can't push into
basically
you.
For, well, the 10-second duration plus, let's say, I don't actually know, but maybe the last pulse happens 1 second before it ends. So for about 13 seconds, you just can't use abilities, and he could just be AFK after planting the spike, basically, unless you want to just run in dry. Yeah, it's ridiculously easy to use, and it doesn't really have any interactivity for the enemy anyway, except for, yeah, I guess running, except he chases, it's a Killjoy ult that is happening continuously and chases you, so you could give up a sight, but he's just going to follow you anyway.
Don't get flashed by his flash entry that he will be able to flash for himself with this ultimate, so that you can kill him, so that the silence ends. That is as interactive as it gets.
Yeah.
If he does not have any flashes and has to push into you with the ultimate, you got a chance.
Yep. But he's combat sim, so it's not a 50-50.
Yeah, and I don't think that will happen super often. No. To be honest with you, it's such a good ultimate that if you're in a bad situation and you don't have your flashes, right, you just save the ult, because you know next round it's a free round win, right? Yeah. So, it's definitely too strong.
Yeah, problematic design to me, to create something that forces somebody to essentially just give up a very long amount of time and space, continuous space, as he chases them. And if your one option to deny this, there should be a decision. Do I want to run away and give up the space, or do I want to contest? It's a decision you have with a Phoenix ult. Do I want to kill his ult or run away? Killjoy ult, do I want to push this ult or run away? You're out of your mind if you push him, because he's combat stim, so it isn't a dry 50-50 fight. And he doesn't even die if you kill him. So you're taking an unfavorable fight that you're not even getting a ton of value out of winning. I mean, you're stopping his ult, which is a big deal. But yeah, no, it's a severely lose-lose decision for the person responding to it.
I mean, it's basically an instant KJ ult, just slightly less strong, combined with a Phoenix ult.
Yeah.
Like that's really what it is. It is the best ult in the game. I mean, it's a duelist ult.
Yeah,
it removes all of your abilities to do anything but gunfight this person, but they have a better gun than you and their utility, but regardless, they have a better gun than you, and they don't die. Yeah. And when we think about Phoenix ult, right, you get Phoenix ulted, you break the Phoenix ult, and he has to go all the way back to his body, right? Mm-hmm. So he doesn't get all of this space necessarily. His teammates have to hold that space without him until he returns, right? In this situation, your KO entries get you a lot of space, gets downed, you just pick him up, and he's just there to continue the fight with you, right? Yeah. So that's a big element to consider, as well as, we'll talk about Sova's presence in the meta, but a good thing to do against Phoenix ult is, once you break the ult his body where he's recalling to. Use your Sova ult there. And you can just kill him and punish him for using his ult. There is your Sova ult, a vulnerable, you could hit him with a Viper Molly and a Sova ult, and it will not kill him while he is down.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
That is. It would do.
So
not quite 850.
he's just a tank. So it's just crazy to think about how free it is to take or retake a site with this ultimate.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's madness. It's probably the one ability in the game that's better than his knife. Yeah. So that's KO, everybody, and that's how we feel about it.
Coming to a meta near you very soon.
That's right. But despite the fact that he is a very heavy, bloated, insane kit, big change to the game, just his existence, they also have a dramatic amount of other changes.
For sure.
So, number one goal of this cast is for Dream and I to help you guys understand these changes and what we think of them, and for us to attempt to predict where we see the meta going. Obviously, we need to go through all these changes, not just KO to do it. It's a lot of work. It can be a little long-winded, but some of the changes aren't that bad, and I think we can probably speed run the kind of changes, and then that'll sort of set us up to talk about the meta in full.
Yeah, we can breeze through a lot of the agents had some pretty minor changes. So
yeah, so let's do that. You ready, Dream?
For sure.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess the big one, is the biggest change is that they changed the economy a lot. They changed weapon economy. I don't think either of us think that's really a big change. They moved some prices up and down a bit. They're now using 50 increments in weapon and utility prices. The big econ change is that utility costs a lot more now. For some agents, for others, the total kit ends up being similar, but basically they upped utility cost. And this causes a big change. I think we can go through each of the agents, but we can talk about the larger implications there. I'll just kind of try to go alphabetically. So Brim, his Molly went from 200 to 250 credits. Other than that, he's Brim, and we don't care about him, and he sucks, right?
Yeah, basically.
Poor Brim. There's Astra. So Astra got some pretty large changes. Her scars now cost 150 credits each instead of 200, but she only gets one free star per round. So that basically, it costs a little more to have a 3-star round than before. It was only 200 credits. You got 2 free stars. You bought a star. Now you get a free star. You buy 2. But her total kit, I'm getting this right, is the same cost.
Yeah, on a full buy, it's the same, but on eco rounds, it's a little tougher, and that's kind of a trend we'll see through a lot of these eco changes. But yeah, she is one of the few agents that didn't have a total price change. It's her, Breach, Cypher, and Killjoy have no total like net change to a full buy cost, right?
Yeah.
Having some ability tweaks in there, right? Breach has some ability tweaks in there, etc. But she is one of those agents that a full buy is unchanged, and that is in the minority in this patch.
Yeah, absolutely. But she got a lot of other changes as well. So, one defining part of Astra, guys, was obviously her suck off rip. The gate goes down and immediately a suck is going off, and you can't get through a piece of space right away on the map. They now take like 2.5, maybe 3 seconds to sort of rev up and blossom, so you can't use a star, usually a suck, right off rip when the round starts anymore, which is a really welcome change and a pretty big hit to some of her map control impact. Things like the A lobby fight on Haven, there's just both teams are just sucking right away to kind of mess up the fight timings. That's not going to happen anymore. Her pull in on the gravity well, the suck might be a little weaker. You can maybe run through it a little bit easier, but it's not a huge change if it is there. I'm not so sure, but basically I did test running through it, and whether it's changed or not, you're going pretty slow. And if there's anything else happening to you while you're running through the suck, it's still not a situation you want to be in. And other than that, there's now a 25-second cooldown on her suck and her stun. So if you have her use a suck, there's a 25-second window instead of a 12-second window where you can not fear it for the rest of the round. What are your overall thoughts on the changes?
I definitely think the biggest sort of like hidden strength of Astra was that ability to have that instant map control using her gravity well, like right at the start of the round. I do think that that's generally limited to certain areas on certain maps, right? kind of areas where you're at a distance from each other, but you've kind of got a little bit of a weird angle. So a lot of traditional utility that you can throw off rip, right? Like a Sage Slow. You're just not able to because of the angle, right? But you're also able to make contact with each other sightline wise very quickly into the round, a second into the round, right? So Haven A lobby versus A long is definitely an example of that. I think both A main and B main in Ascent are like that to a certain extent. But when we look at other maps, right? You look at like Bind. There's not really an instance of that. You can kind of do that with Hookah as like a CT where you could suck like the attacker's area of Hookah and try and make an aggressive play onto them. But it's not just really to play for control. It's to like do an aggro exec play, not more of a slow defaulty type of play. So I think that will make her a little weaker on those maps. Certainly. I do think that the cooldown increase, I would rather the cooldown increase have been a little less, but then have just changed the strength of the ability itself. I think that would have maybe been a little better. It still feels like a incredibly strong ability. And it doesn't feel like it's very often that you are needing to use you were trying to use sucks on cooldown. Like as soon as it came off cooldown, it's not as if you were just using another one again immediately. So I think that wasn't necessarily what you needed to hit. I do like that it makes you feel like if you force the Astra to use it, you have a little bit more of a window. I like that this will mean that stun is more of an ability instead of just a thing you use if you have to when your suck is on cooldown. It will mean that you'll play around how that ability works a little bit more, which is certainly good for the character as a whole. But honestly, I think Astra is still gonna be pretty strong in a lot of cases. I don't think doing changes that keep the suck at its current level of impact will do a lot of movement to this character.
I completely agree with that. I've been on the fence because they are hard nerfs, some of them, especially the early map control. And, I think post-plant, you can't suck multiple times anymore, things like that. And 25 seconds is a longer window to work with as an attacking team with the suck being down to try to get through somewhere than 12 seconds. But that ability was just so strong before she came out. We were in a place with the meta where teams were popping a lot. They were just trying to explode onto sites. And if you're standing somewhere with utility out, you can immediately react to a pop, but it's hard to always be doing that. You also have to have a gun out. People can walk up, take fights. Astra did a lot. She can cover choke points all over the map from anywhere, and the suck is instant. No matter what she's doing, she can just flick over to a part of the map and press the button, and it's immediately sucking, and it's a piece of stall. You can throw one flash and immediately she can react, turn to that site, hit suck, and you can't quite get out with it. That is really valuable. That is still there, even if there's a longer cooldown. She's still an agent who can have instantaneous stall as a reaction to a team trying to execute onto space and cover every choke point where that can happen in the same round and safely react to any one of those spots from somewhere on the map. I'm thinking mostly on defense. To me, that might even be more important. We can get toward that question of whether that tool as a response to attack is going to be more important. But I think that's still very strong, and it's hard for me to believe that Omen or Brim is offering enough to compensate for that. It's kind of where I'm at with her.
Yeah, and honestly, the biggest weakness of Astra in general wasn't impacted or changed at all by this patch, and it's her ult being kind of shit. But one thing that kind of keeps her where she is the other controllers' ults are shit too. Brim and Omen ults are not very good. So, you know, looking at making those tools a little bit better could give you a reason to edge out over Astra, but I definitely agree. Her ability to have stuff all over the map and react instantaneously, and because she is so good at that kind of defensive utility trading and stalling, yes, she gets impacted by these eco changes where she gets less free utility, which is a trend we will see. And for other people, utility is just straight up more expensive and they get less of it, right?
Yeah.
But the overall change to the cast is that there's less utility and utility is more expensive to have consistently. And that means that when you have to use multiple pieces of utility to get her to trigger that star to use that suck, you have a lot less utility to then try and push in during that downtime when it's on cooldown, right? There is just a lot less utility in the game, and because this can nullify multiple pieces of utility, it still ends up being pretty strong.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, I actually don't mind overall these changes. I think she got nice nerfs, but I don't hate her still being the best, you know, smokes pick.
I don't think I didn't want her thrown in the gutter
at
all. I think she's an interesting and fun character that has a lot of skill expression and is more interactive than, you know, KO necessarily is. Definitely. And she does have clear weaknesses, right? Like her ult really is doggy doo-doo.
Yeah, it is. Yep. All right, so the next kind of change, these end up being pretty long-winded changes alphabetically. We've got Breach. His clear, his aftershock is now 200 credits instead of one big painful explosion. It revs up at the same rate, but once it's ready to go, it pulses 3 times, like boom, 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 for 60 each. So you can kind of walk in and out of it. There's a little bit more of an interaction than just, hey, at this part you can't be standing here, you're dead. His flashes now cost 250 instead of 200. We've already said that pretty much every flash now costs 250. He can only have 2 flashes now. His stun is much wider, and it charges faster, his signature ability, and it still has a 40-second recharge. It might have been 35 originally, but I believe now it's 40. And his ult is now, instead of kind of a tapering out shape, it's just this giant rectangle. For example, if you're standing in A main on Ascent, it just covers the whole site and the whole back of heaven, and it goes fast. It's pretty juiced up. I think these are nice changes. They follow kind of their trend of trying to make initiators a little more self-sufficient. In this case, his stun is easier to work with. His flash doesn't feel to me like he can really pull a rifle out any quicker. With the flash changes, his flash doesn't seem to pop faster, and I kind of feel like it's a garbage ability now, to be honest. It's by far, in my opinion, actually, the worst flash in the game. It's pretty darn hard not to turn from it, and it doesn't really affect you if you turn from it, and he can't really peek with it anyway. His stun is nice, but you could still one-tap somebody while stunned, and I like his ult. It's definitely pretty beefy, but he still would exist in a comp most likely where there's at least one being KO's ult that you want more so, and I actually think it's quite possible that there's going to be comps where I would argue the second best ult is not Breach's. So even if somebody has a good ult, if it's the, you know, third best ult in a comp and they're not a duelist farming kills, you're not even going to end up seeing it show up a lot. People got really excited about his stun being changed on Twitter and stuff. I'm not a big Breach believer personally, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence with where I think Breach will end up in the meta, because I think it depends on a couple of things that we'll get to. But as far as these actual changes, I mean, I like the aftershock change. It was just never. It was so rare that it ever got a kill, right? Yeah. Basically, only if you had a nerdy lineup on a Sova drone spot right? That's like the highest chance that you're getting a kill with it. It really is just like the other initiator tools. It's a zone control tool,
Yeah.
and it lasts a little longer. It's a little more continuous now, so I think it does a better job at that. So I like that. Flashes, I mean, they cost more. You only get two of them. They did not really get any buffs or compensation, and the effectiveness of flashes has been nerfed. I do think the strength that his flashes retain is the ability to set a teammate up from range, which other flashes don't really have. Skye's birds can do that, but the travel time is a long time. You hear it coming because it's flying for so long. So his ability to set people up, a la the old school Jett Breach type combos, he still is the king in that arena. Which is really the only way you would kind of want to use his flashes anyways. But his stun, I am actually really interested in these changes because it charging faster, as far as being able to get it to full distance, is great. It really did feel like to get some of those full distance stuns where you have like cool angles that can hit multiple areas of the map, you almost have to like already have it charged to try and get the timing you want sometimes, which just feels like shit, obviously. But what I'm really interested in is the fact that it charges quickly, and coupled with the Astra changes that we talked about, where you can't get that instant map control. Breach's stun allows you to do that, right?
And true.
Obviously here in NA, we never saw as much Breach play, but in EU, when Breach was at its peak, and in Korea, when they were playing a lot of these Breach comps, a huge part of his effectiveness is being able to do those stuns at the very start of the round that allow you to beat those timings and get that map control. For example, a lobby in Haven, which we've already talked about, right? Having the Breach sit in a connector and do his stun that hits everyone trying to walk into a lobby so that the defense can get total control and the Breach can just instantly leave. He does not have to be the A player, and he can do that. I think there are going to be a lot more situations where that works because it charges so much faster. So he can be like further away on the map and still give your team a stun to get map control somewhere else. So I think that's where a lot of the Breach hype is coming from right now, is kind of being that replacement to Astra's strength and being able to be that bully in the first 2 seconds of the round. I think that that's really significant. I'm not sure if that ends up making him worth a slot. I think that'll come down to some testing and some playstyle stuff, because even the regions that were very aware of that strength of Breach and were abusing that strength of Breach abandoned him a long time ago. So I don't know that that will necessarily keep him in the conversation and keep him in a strong meta spot. But I do think it's interesting to think about being that replacement for Breach, and NA teams that didn't really abuse that about Breach back in the day, but got really good at abusing that with Astra, maybe seeing that as a replacement. I think that could be really interesting. And I think his ult is very good now.
It is really good.
I think it genuinely, previously I thought it was a battle. Because it was just so easy to outplay, to get those one taps. You can see it coming and start running back and then jump at the right time and do some like air strafe surfing and get away and all this stuff. It moves so much faster now, which helps a lot. The other thing I want to test that I didn't get a chance to is some of the height interactions. When there's a height disparity with Breach ult, where if you are above if you are Breach, you are casting your ult and you are above the person that gets hit by the ult, they do not have that ability to like jump and surf and get out of the ult. It kind of sucks them down to the ground. Whereas if they're above you, they can just bouncy house themselves into the skybox, right? So I wasn't able to test how those interactions have either changed or not changed, right? But regardless, I think his ult went from one of the weaker ults in the game to definitely one of the stronger ults, and an ult that you have to be really afraid of, especially in my opinion on T side when you have the bomb down. He just clears an entire site. You can play pretty retakey on defense if you think the breach ult is coming in to hit site, right? You on a lot of these maps, you don't really have that option to play hard off site, and be able to win, even if you plant with that in mind. It can still be really difficult to deal with that. So I think that will be a good strength for him. But I think when we look at a lot of these other agent changes, you can definitely make him work, and there's a play style for him, but I'm not confident that he's going to be one of these meta-defining type agents.
Yeah. I do like that his ult and his stun, the biggest problem I had with them was people would just pull out utility and throw that as a response while concussed. And he actually synergizes really nice with KO, bringing in the suppression mechanic, because somebody can't use abilities, and their one option, other than if they're in a position to attempt to just flee, which I think sometimes they won't be, is to just take a fight. And if Breach is saying, okay, well, you can't use abilities, and now your fight sucks because you're stunned, coupled together, they're insane. Like, it's an expensive round, and I'm not saying in practice that teams will end up being able to dump these ults together a lot, but if you KO ult and then breach ult immediately after, like, there is just nothing anyone can do. Like, that is a clinched round. Like, they're stunned, concussed, flying in the air, can't use abilities to respond, can't get away. They're just going to die, and I think that's nice about him. I mean, I think even just using the KO knife with his ult, right, you suppress them and then you ult them, they're basically just sitting there waiting to die. And yeah, my biggest concern is how will these flashes actually end up getting any value? Basically, can he find enough value beyond the stun, because it's only once every 40 seconds? And can we get him his ult enough that either these flashes are doing something and or the ult is showing up enough that he's bringing enough consistent value round to round? We'll
I mean,
see,
even just stun partnered with knife,
it's
is
really
still very hard to deal with. But again, that's looking at it more because I think KO works kind of like a pseudo duelist, even just a duelist, as opposed to an initiator. So if you have KO kind of filling that duelist role, and you don't have like a big gap close type of duelist, then I think Breach is just never going to be a high priority, because he is about setting people up from a distance, and the people he's setting up from a distance are the people that can cover distance. So, and with Raze and Jett both getting hit, which we'll get to, we don't know how that's going to work. But if KO and Breach are working together to set up a duelist, that could be insanely good. So I think Breach's strength is going to end up more depending on what KO's role actually ends up being, because they're both in that initiator, and we don't know it, and we'll talk about who we think KO can replace and where the meta will go, but I think that will dictate whether Breach has a place more than anything else, not necessarily Breach's strength relative to other characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be really tricky. We have to see how the meta plays out, and where does he fit in? And we will get to that. It'll be a little easier to talk about once we've got through all these changes, but he's definitely a fun one. I'm very curious. I don't have confidence I'm not super confident in my pulse on him yet. Okay, so we hit Brim. Nothing really happening there. I'm going to speed run the Cypher changes here. Unless you have anything big to add, his ult is now 6 points, and Jett can throwbacks to beta, no longer dash through his trips, which I guess we can maybe talk about more in the Jett section. It's a solid nerf. I mean, it helps him get a little more value and makes Jett a little weaker if they both end up getting picked for their other reasons. If Jett ends up being garbage for other reasons, then this buff doesn't even help Cypher. If Cypher's garbage for other reasons, this doesn't even affect Jett, because they have to both be around for this to be relevant and against each other. But I think we can, I think as we talk about the meta, we can talk about whether Cypher, being a very retake-focused Sentinel, will be useful or not, and a lurking attack Sentinel. But there's no real changes on Cypher that
shitty ult,
anything.
Maybe worst ult in the game. Glad it cost 6. Good change. That's about it.
Yep. And then we've got alphabetically KO. We don't need to get. We already got into him. Jett, her Cloudburst, her smoke now costs 200 credits instead of 100. Dream, I didn't test it, but you were saying you tested it, and it seems to last maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Nice buff there.
Yeah, it seemed like it added at least a couple seconds to the duration for sure.
Yeah, and then the updraft now costs 150 credits instead of 100 each. The ult is now 7 points, which is a super welcome change. I still think I just hate the ult's design, even if it's not super OP. And she can no longer dash through trips if she's against the Cypher. Her total kit is now 900 credits, which is a freaky hit to her. If you're talking about Jett Op specifically, the Op now costs 300 less, so that kind of like, I guess you could argue helps her a little bit, but yeah, I mean, what do you think of these? This is kind of I'm not sure how much I think these matter.
I think that I like the idea from Riot of let's make the op a little cheaper and let's make Jett's kit a little more expensive to compensate. So if Jett wants to eco for an op, it actually hurts a little bit more because her smokes, which she uses to fight and be ratty and stuff, are an incredibly core part of her kit, costs a lot more. I'm also glad they last a little longer. They felt kind of weird in their old state where, yes, they were super cheap, but they also just went away so fast. It was just really weird. So I like that a lot. And the ult costing an extra orb means that she will have it less and she'll be able to use it as a replacement for a gun less, which impacts her ability to eco for an op, which is good. But I think reasonably those changes impact her on pistol round a little bit. Her buys on pistol round are awkward. And it affects her on ladder when you are playing on your own. But in a team setting, if we are running a Jett and we want to get an op online, someone else is just going to eco for the op. So it doesn't end up impacting her ability to have an op very much. Really, the only thing that does is the ult change, in my opinion. But I mean, yeah, that's about it. I don't really think there's much else here. I don't think the Cypher trip change will end up being much of a thing. Like we talked about, they both have to be there. She has to be running into his util. He has to not be suppressed. So, which I think if you're running a Jett, you will be running a KO to help create those openings for her. So, yeah, I don't think they do a ton of changes, and I think Jett was already the strongest duelist in the meta. I think making her more expensive is a good thing, but I think ultimately when you look at the changes that a lot of other duelists have gotten, you're still pretty happy running a Jett if you're a team with a Jett player or if it's a map that's strong for opping.
I think if Cypher does become a really popular pick, I think it might sting pretty hard for her. I have fond memories of playing Cypher against Jett and just getting some nice free kills against the dash. It does hurt. It puts a lot more weight on a Sova to shock dart the trips. So I do think if Cypher's like showing up everywhere for a different reason, that I could believe it's enough of a hit that like it's just not worth running her because she's dying too much while trying to create the space on a pop. But for me, that's just a speculation and entirely hinges on if Cypher's a meta pick. I think it's possible that changes enough to kind of really hurt her as an option, potentially. And so that's a if hinging on another agent being meta. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I think her changes in and of themselves are not, too worrisome.
Yeah.
And then we've got Omen. His TPs cost 150 instead of 100. His paranoia went down from 400 to 300. You have to buy one of your smokes. You get one for free, but you have to buy the other in order to start around with two of them for 100 credits. And other than that, they regen for 40 seconds throughout the round. So it used to be 35. A little bit of a nerf, but I feel like these changes aren't really... His price changes aren't really going to do much to decide whether he has a spot in a comp or not. For me.
Yeah, I agree. I think again, can be awkward on eco rounds. Like you lose the pistol round, now it's round 2, and you don't want to force up, right? You want to save, like full save, so everyone can have full util against the other team's bonus. Now you only have one smoke. That does kind of suck. So you're probably almost always going to have to invest that extra 100, which will impact his eco a little bit when you talk about over the course of a whole round. But like you said, I think it's much more about what he can bring and not necessarily his price. He's pretty average price wise. A full buy costs 700. That's super average. There's a couple characters that cost more than that, one being Jett, who we just talked about, who a full buy costs 900, which is the only agent at 900, the most expensive in the game, right? But 700, I think almost half the cast is at 700. So pretty standard, not a big deal cost-wise. More just about his strengths, which haven't really changed. If anything, the longer smoke regen hurts him a little bit. Sova darts a little longer.
Paranoia is a little indirectly, I think, better now that other flashes are generally weaker. That finds more value. It's more important.
I definitely agree. I think that the smoke regenning slower obviously hurts, but the majority of the other free regenning abilities also moved up from 30 or 35 seconds to 40. So I think when you think about the cycle of the round, it doesn't end up being as punishing because those other free abilities that also dictate the rhythm of the round are on the same timeline as his smokes anyways. So I don't think that ends up being that big of a deal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Moving on to Phoenix here, his flashes now cost 250. Other than that, he's
rest in peace, Phoenix.
Yeah, I think we can, get it. I don't think we need to break it down too hard, but it's hard to believe he'll have much of a place for me in the meta right now. I guess one interesting thing is his ult is still 6 points. It's a very good ult. I think it shows potentially as a side point that Riot clearly is comfortable with agents where a lot of their kit's power level lies in their ult, make the ult cheaper in that case because that agent's value hinges so much on having ults. Maybe they really like that some agents like Phoenix are themed around snowballing these ults. Like, it was just an interesting change that in a vacuum, if you look at that ult 6 and Raze ult 8, it's like, what? Like, that's kind of crazy. But when you look at his whole kit and the value each agent brings, I think it can be explained.
Yeah, for sure. And we can talk about that a little bit when we talk about Raze's unfortunate changes. But I think for Phoenix, in a vacuum, I do like his design. I think he's an interesting character. We run him on multiple maps on the current patch, but KO is just an infinitely better version of Phoenix.
Yeah.
There's just no two ways about it. He is just Phoenix plus disable and info. Why would I ever run Phoenix when KO is in the game? Until significant changes happen to probably both agents.
Yeah, I completely agree. Next up, Reyna. Her flash now costs 250. What do you I know you have some thoughts on Reyna and where she sits. Do you want to take it off here?
Sure. I mean, I think when we look at purely the patch notes, she definitely benefits from the changes. A lot of pistol buys are awkward now. Reyna just buying a flash and a gun was what she would do anyways. And other people having less utility and being weaker on pistol rounds definitely makes her even more of the pistol queen, which certainly helps for sure. And obviously, just like with Omen, traditional flashes being weaker because you can turn from them much easier mean that her flashes are stronger. Her flashes, pairing with a drone or pairing with a knife, for example, to make it to where you can't break them when, she can throw it through a wall. So no one is under threat. You get hit with a knife and a Reyna Lear through a wall. And you just get run over, right? Those are all really good signs for Reyna.
Yeah.
But she also just gets absolutely bullied by KO.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
her whole desire of I'm gonna play in like this weird off angle that you normally can't play in, and then I take this fight because I can dismiss away, right? That's like the key Reyna thing, whether it's on attack or defense, right? You can just push around corners and be confident. You can do the wide swing even if there's two people there and you might get traded, because you can actually get traded, right? You don't have to isolate the fights necessarily. That no longer works. KO just pops ult and Reyna is not able to do that, and she had better hope that she is positioned like a normal agent would position, which is not what Reynas usually do. So at the very least, like, you're not going to be able to play in some of the really obvious Reyna spots because you're definitely going to get knifed. And certainly against his ult, you're going to have to be really paranoid. So I think that it's definitely a give and take. I think there's a potential that KO might not be run on Icebox because Sova's drone is, in my opinion, extremely necessary on that map. I think Viper and Sage, for example, will still be extremely necessary on that map. So it's hard to think of a slot KO can take. So maybe Reyna remains to have her best map be Icebox because she's buff compared to other people, and KO might not be run on that map. But I think even though she gets helped in some ways, maybe she'll be good in this first tournament before KO becomes enabled, but it feels like KO just puts so much pressure on her that it's hard to imagine that she'll be a common pick.
Yeah, she's in an interesting place. I agree. She gets super bullied out of a lot of her benefits. In a weird way, her Leer is better now that traditional flashes are worse, and in the same way I was saying that a lot of the time I think if you're caught out of position and a good knife is thrown, you might not have an option to escape, and really your only choice is going to be to take your 50-50 now that you're suppressed, and breach stun is good against that. I think, okay, I can take my 50-50 and dodge your breach or sky flash, but if you're suppressed in generator on ascent and you want to, your only choice is to just eventually take a fight. If, throwing the Leer, the eye out makes it so that you can't do that, then I think in some vacuum scenario where aggressively the Reyna's working with a KO knife, she just eliminates the other option you have by putting eye out. So coming out of these sites with eye just sitting in the air while somebody's suppressed, it can kind of make it so it's a complete lose-lose. And I really like that idea on paper. But you're right that KO also is making the opposing Reyna much worse. So I'm super curious to see what happens. It's a really interesting interaction. And other than that, I didn't like Reyna as a pick before this patch at all. So it's like, unless this eye is just getting some insane is like the exclusive option to put players in horrible positions and you kind of like need to run it, then I don't think she would. I think she'd be a pretty niche pick. And so now we've got Raze, where we're getting there. We've got a few agents left here, and some of them are going to be pretty brief, I think, but Raze
Another
here,
rest in peace from me.
Her boom bot is double the credits, 200 to 400, and her ult is now 8 points. These are heavy hits. Her total kit's 800 credits now. Her ult was good, and now it's not that painful. I don't want that ult at 8 points. I prefer Sova ult to it. There's much better ults in the game right now. Boombot is just so expensive when it's the kind of ability you wanted on every round, and it's what brought her a lot of the value, into a comp is I have this Boombot to take this space every round. It's so expensive. I think there's a world where if popping because of KO knife becomes insane and you kind of want that mobility agent just closing a gap while you pop, there's a paranoia or knife hitting and you've got the Jett dashing out and trips really hurt her, well, at least a Raze satcheling out is going to break the trips and go over them. So, like, if somehow Cypher's getting picked a ton, Jett can't dash, you still really need the mobility, I could see a world, but we got Dream shaking his head, and I agree. I'm skeptical.
I think even if Cypher ends up becoming really meta and that punishes Jett, you just aren't playing that gap close style. I don't think that it means that you put Raze in instead. I mean, 400 Boombot is just... It's comical.
That's pretty
It
brutal.
makes no sense unless you're not worried about it being compared to the value of other abilities, but you're just worried about Raze's economy only.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tied in cost with Drone, which it is obviously way worse than Drone. The only thing that you could argue that is better about it is that she can have her gun out while the boombot is pathing, right? Which isn't insignificant, but the things that Drone has as an advantage are just insane over that, right? And you do want to have it every round, and it's not as if it's like an Omen Paranoia, which used to be 400, is now cheaper than boombot, by the way. Again, comical. But it's not like it's an ability like Paranoia where you're using it to exec and to go try and get a kill and like dominate some map control. It's like a very throwaway defaulty, like, is there someone here? Like, if they break it, okay, it's worth trading the info, right? That is not at all worth 400, right? That's right. It really hurts her ability to default, her ability to play map control. The hookah queen might be dead, straight dead, even on bind, in my opinion. As far as the ult, I definitely think the ult is stronger than maybe you do. I think it is an extremely good ultimate. Obviously, I think it is an ult that does require you to be good at using it, right? One of the harder ults to use in the game. I'm sure some people are like, man, but the radius is so big, whatever. But against good players, it is not easy to just run it down with Raze ult, get a kill, and live. That is, you have to be good at Raze and have good information on where people are going to be and know how you want to play out that situation to be able to get that value. But for those good Raze players, it gets an insane amount of value. I think the average amount of kills per ult use it's got to be the highest for Raze ult. It's got to be. So I think that in that sense, making it cost more, especially when she is a duelist, she does get a lot of kills. She can get a lot of kills with nade very easily, comboing with people's abilities without ever having to peek. I don't think that's a terrible idea, but I just think when you look at it in the context of the cost of other ults and how so few ults have that 8 cost, that it feels really punishing.
Yeah, I agree.
Rip Raze, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think and Knife also helps set her ult up even more. So it's maybe it's a reasonable thing to think about it being 8 points, because when somebody's suppressed and has no way to dash away or throw anything, then you're really pretty fucked when a Raze ult's coming at you.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the next up is Sage. Her slow orb costs 200 credits instead of 100. I think this just it looks like it takes her kit from 600 to or 500 to 700, kind of matches the larger theme of util costing more. Her ult costs 8 points now instead of 7. My only real comments here are, I like Sage. I'm not sure if she'll have Reyna comp or not. I don't think the res ult point nerf was necessary at all, but I don't really think this affects her much.
I don't think these changes really matter much at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that, you can't go wall slow armor in pistol round anymore, right? That is just kind of lame. You're probably going wall ghost, which is a buy people would do on Sage anyways, but just a little less flexibility in pistol rounds and in ecos, in force buys, whatever, which is good. I think ecos and forces have been too easy to win because you have access to too much util, and the cheap guns are still pretty good. So they made the cheap guns cheaper so you can still buy them, but you have to be choosy about your utility. And I like that in a game like this. I like having to limit how much utility you have in a force, so you have to be really smart about how you use it, right? So I like that change in general. I think that Sage is still going to play the same. You're still going to want to probably use a slow early in the round to fight for map control somewhere in a defaulty kind of way. The fact that that costs 100 extra credits doesn't really matter. She was already a super cheap agent. Now she's just an average cost agent. It doesn't super matter. And I'm going to be honest, there are a lot of very good Sage players that only get 1.5 res currently. So I think that to get res early enough in the half, and for like a Raze ult, a KJ ult, something where it's like, oh, usually it takes a while to get this ult, but I got it by round 4, so I'm just going to use it in round 4 because it's going to have a lot of power and it's going to let me snowball to another ult really fast. Sage ult, you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to use my ult this round. Like, there have to be some pretty particular scenarios to even be able to use it, even when you do get it early. So I think with that, she does not get punished as hard by the extra ult charge, honestly. I think it just means that, you know, you're going to expect 1 res around, and you're just going to have to be a little smarter about when you want to go for those reses. If you're in one of those late round scenarios where you're resing to try and bait someone so you can swing, right? That's a little less good.
Yeah.
But that's about it, man. I think Sage is pretty much in a similar spot. Still going to be almost a must run on Icebox because it's Icebox. Still going to be really strong on Split because it's Split. Still going to be strong on Ascent because Ascent. That's about it.
Agreed. And I think it's nice that her slow covers the same amount of time generally that a suppress covers. Yeah, I think she'll still have her spots where she has her spots.
I also think that she is one of the agents that's good against KO. Because you put wall down and wall don't give a fuck. If there's a knife coming, right? And that limits their angles. You can still be boosted. You can still be playing behind some dumb corner. And like you said, you can sit there with your slow ready to go as Sage, jump peeking, and that doesn't really feel that bad compared to a lot of other agents. And just throw it when the knife comes in before it actually pops, and you can just vibe out and you're okay taking those duels. So I think Sage, not going to be a must run, but if you're a team that likes using Sage, you're not going to have any trouble pulling her off this patch, in my opinion.
I agree. All right, we'll speed run these last few. We'll start with the heaviest one here, is Skye. What are your thoughts on Skye here, Dream? I'll go through the changes real quick. The dog costs 50 more credits, 250 now. It sees farther. Her flash now costs 250 credits instead of 100. She only has 2. They recharge every 40 seconds. The dog sees... I already said the dog sees farther. And her flash, when she pops it now, there's no animation. So she can flash for herself much more efficiently than previous. Yeah, that's pretty much her changes.
Yeah, and she does get 1 flash for free.
Yes.
Which recharges.
Pretty big, actually, to get a free flash.
Because are there any other characters who their flash is their free ability? No. Yeah, so that's a big deal, especially because it's a recharging flash. I think it's also the only one of those. So she retains a lot of her pistol strength when a lot of other agents feel awkward on pistol. Her, when you look at the other flash agents, them buying a flash plus armor or a flash plus a gun, that's all they're getting. That feels kind of bad. If she buys a flash plus armor or a flash plus a gun, she's got 2 flashes that regen. She still feels very strong in these pistol rounds, and it's also totally viable to full buy all util in pistol round on her, which is not something I think any other flash character can do. Maybe Breach can. Actually, Breach definitely can, but it feels worse, right? It feels good on her. The dog buff is huge. The vision range feels like it's almost double. It's a lot bigger. And obviously, the really big change is that you still have an animation when you throw the bird, but popping the bird no longer has an animation, meaning you can have your gun out the whole time, meaning you can throw the flash, and even if you want to pop flash, you're still taking your gun out quicker than you would before because you're taking it out just following throwing the bird, rather following popping the bird. And if you aren't trying to pop flash and you have a longer distance flash you want to throw, or like a weird lineup or something, you just throw it and let it autopilot fly. Then you pop the flash and instantly swing off it. Again, you can throw it behind you, like with the flash changes that we talked about. So Skye seems extremely strong.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it will be. I think Icebox is maybe the only map that I am not going to want to be trying to run Skye immediately on. Just again because I think drone is so incredibly necessary on that map. Maybe the vision changes on Dog make it more usable, and make it kind of good. But I mean I think that map. But on that map, drone is super strong. On the other maps, I think Skye is just better than Sova.
Yeah.
And I think especially with her having the fastest charging ult in the game,
it's really nice that there were no changes other than her ult.
It only costs 6, but again, her ult still is the only ability where you use your ult to charge your next ult.
Except I think, okay, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure KO gets points while he's ulted.
I thought he didn't, so I'm not sure. We should try and find some gameplay and double check.
I played a ranked game and looked down after I ulted, or not a ranked, unrated on him, and I thought, did I just get... I killed 2 people after... But maybe I had... My ult had expired, then I got the kills. We should check, but we're not sure now, but if that is the case, that's complete fucking madness. Like, just absolute batshit nonsense
I really hope
madness.
That's not the case. It's already
we gotta find that out.
Bonkers strong. But... So, especially when you compare that to where Sova's at with his ult count now. And again, when we're talking about having the ability to take away people's ability to cast, right? Skye can give you that info really easily. So KO doesn't always have to use his knife only for info. He can use it for the CC. Following the ult is really big. Following the bird is really big. Bird knife not only lets you confirm that there's someone there, but they're either going to have to turn from the bird so they can't shoot the knife, or they're flash so they can't shoot the knife. So I think there's a ton of synergy there. I really expect that to be a very strong duo.
I agree.
And Skye plus KO ult is just gross, man. You just the KO ult just makes it so no one on site can do anything. The Skye ult tells you exactly where everyone is, and you just kill them. So I think Skye's going to be very, very, very strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you run her with KO, if her flashes are much weaker at popping, it's not that punishing because you have the best pop flash in the game in your team's kit. The flashes become more about info. You can rely more on that, which is fine. Exactly. She could just do kind of gimmicky, self-sufficient stuff with it. And we've talked a little bit, I think you talked about this at the start of the cast, but because flashes don't really blind you when they're behind you, there's a mix-up option of you throw a flash and you peek with it. Does a player want to turn from it? Because what if you're peeking in front of it, shooting them while it's behind you? Obviously, Skye already had that mix-up, and she can pop these flashes behind her or during an execute, just start throwing them behind her teammates while they hit a site. And yeah, it's not great at pop flashing to reliably win an angle, maybe, but you can have a Skye bird popping behind you over and over, even as Skye. You could just throw the bird, and yeah, maybe they hear it and know it's coming, but if you swing in front of it and pop it while your gun's out, if anyone does decide to timing peek you, you know, there's some nice options. It's not as good, but like it's more fine to rely on using your flash for info or these gimmick options when your primary flash in your comp is the KO flash anyway. So I think that's really nice. And
I think the anti-flash changes are a buff to Skye. Whereas KO is the other character that can make really easy and good use of throwing a flash behind themselves and swinging. Skye is that other character. It's kind of awkward for Phoenix to do that because of his curveball. If you're on an angle and you want to throw a curveball that the corner's on my left and I want to throw my flash to the right, I got to like position so my flash doesn't run into the wall. It's a little awkward. It's going to full flash my teammates. Yoru. Yeah, Yoru can do it a little bit, but I still don't think it's as strong as KO and Skye's ability to do it. So they can abuse it in that sense. But Skye also can abuse fake flashes even better now because people are so much more incentivized to turn.
That's a good point.
So she benefits from it both ways. The flash changes let her be more aggressive with her flashes, and her mind game element got added. I think Skye is in an insane spot right now.
I agree. One of the nicest, one of the heaviest buffs there was. I think
it's got to be the biggest buff.
Yeah, I think so. And then we've got Sova's changes. Owl costs 400, the drone, instead of 300. Whatever. Shock costs 50 credits more per shock. Recon is now on a 40-second cooldown. The ult costs 8 points. I think the ult change was merited. I think it was the best ult in the game, or really close with a couple others. I think it's fine for it to be on 8. I think these changes are great and don't hit him that hard. And for me, it's just Skye is now really good. And are you going to run and KO kind of looks like a must pick. So are you going to run Skye or Sova, or are you going to run triple initiator? It's just, how do you plug him into a comp is a question that has to be figured out. But similar to how we were talking about some of these other agents, I don't think his changes really specifically are impacting him much here. I think he's fine.
Yeah. I think he just kind of gets pushed out a little bit because the initiator role is so stacked right now, with KO coming out and with Skye being so heavily buffed, right? I think that's easily the biggest thing. I think shock darts being a little more expensive doesn't fucking matter. I think drone going back up to 400 cost doesn't matter. I think the ult cost going up definitely does matter, because Sova is a character where you could get multiple ults in a half, and like we've talked about, his ult is just insanely good. You can stall plant with it. You can just hunt for a tag with your drone with it. You can use it to just push and take space and exec a site. Like, it's one of the most versatile ults in the game for both space control and getting kills. You could get multi-kills with it when you set up trap plays, right? Just a very, very strong ult. So I think having that less often does hurt him a lot, but I don't think, because it is so universally useful, I don't think he has that same problem that Sage does, where her ult is a lot more situational. So it's reasonable to think you'll only get one off in a half, whereas with Sova, I think it will still be very easy to get 2 ults in a half. It will just be extremely unlikely to get 3, which only happened occasionally before anyways.
I really like these changes.
I mean, that's really how I feel about it. I think it does. Sova's been too good for too long. I think if Skye hadn't been giga buffed and KO hadn't come out, he would be in a good spot, have some parity with Skye. We would see him as a little bit more of a healthy agent rather than a perma pick. But I think genuinely in this case, assuming that he is still necessary on Icebox and Skye's dog changes don't render his drone kind of unneeded, then I think he will basically be at a 0% pick rate on all the other maps.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure yet, but I definitely think, other than, I agree with Icebox, I think I'm leaning toward Skye being the better pick, but I'm curious to see kind of how some of his recon synergizes with the knife and stuff, and I think it's quite possible that if teams are running no Sentinel or no Duelist, that he actually ends up having a fight for the flex spot. Like, is a team going to run a Viper or a Sage? Like, I could see a world, depending on the meta, where, like, you actually are running triple initiator, KO, Skye, and Sova.
I think you need a little stopping power somewhere.
That's true. Yeah, you're definitely lacking stall in that regard. That is a good point.
Yeah.
So that you would just have to be committing so aggressively to a retake meta, or believing in that, like, and being able to pull that off,
or doing some vision strikers shit off rip on CT side. But if you don't have a gap close because you don't have a duelist, then that's pretty hard to do as well. So
that's a good point. Yeah. And then we've got Viper, whose mollies are now 200 credits instead of 100. Maybe her mollies are marginally shorter. There was people saying it might be 7 seconds instead of 8.
Yeah, it seemed a little shorter, but it's hard to tell. Yeah.
I think that it hurts that the knife is a little scary for her, because now she has to be sitting there molly ready. But I think if Astra's still getting picked a lot, she'll be just fine. I also think if Astra Changes or KO coming into the game are making plants even easier and incentivizing teams to, if it's more risky to play on the site, you want to play for me retake more, we're circling back to the Omen meta in that sense, then I think she will end up being really powerful, because she could stall. It's a good stall tool to have the mollies, but also if you are getting plants easily, I mean, her Molly just carries your post plant, and that hasn't changed. So I think she's quite likely to show up in a lot of these comps still.
Yeah, I think that there is some more risk for Viper. She can get her weaknesses can get abused a little bit more because of KO coming into the game, not really because of anything else. So that's good. Her strengths are still very strong. She can't buy full util plus armor on the pistol round anymore, which is a welcome change. She was the only character in the game that could do that prior to these changes. I am glad that she cannot buy full util plus armor. That is really dumb. I do think that KO being able to scan people and tell you who they are and turn their abilities off through smokes definitely heavily impacts Viper, particularly in her ult, where other initiators have a really hard time doing anything to her, where KO will be able to make things hard for her with his knife in her ult. So I think that's definitely important. But yeah, I think on strong Viper maps, Icebox and Bind, it's pretty hard to imagine it being worth skipping Viper because she really just didn't get changed very much. Yeah. And other people having less utility and flashes being less strong, so you don't have to be as scared from just one flash, potentially people playing less gap closers. It just means that Viper's ability to regen her util becomes a stronger strength than it already was, because people have so much less to throw at you to force your non-permanent util out, right? So your mollies or your Astra stars, right? So I think on the strong Viper maps, she'll still be really strong. I think you'll probably see less Viper on the less traditional Viper maps like Haven and Ascent. I think you'll be definitely be able to get away with skipping Viper on those maps. She was already situational on those maps. I think if you don't want to hard commit to the Viper playstyle, or you don't have a super like I want to play Viper type of player, you shouldn't play Viper on those maps. Yeah. But I think that if you do have a Viper player and you do like that style, you can absolutely still play that style on those maps. And on her strong maps, again, Icebox and Bind, I think she's still going to have an extraordinarily high pick rate.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very true. I think she looks great, and especially, yeah, no, 100% agreed. And then we've got my boy Yoru, who I'll speed run it for the sake of time, unless you have anything to add, but his flash is now 250 instead of 200. I thought he had place as a niche pick on Breeze or maybe Icebox if you were replacing a Reyna or Phoenix with him, but like, why would you do that now, especially with KO? I think Yoru is kind of poo-poo, and they've implied a rework is incoming, and that's kind of that with Yoru, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some crazy universe where you do need gap close, but Cypher's too good and Raze is too nerfed, so you use Yoru TP to kind of, bullshit your way through that. But I think that that's pretty unlikely. There is something to say about, if it is a retake meta, him being able to be on one site with a TP on the other side on defense, so you can do fast retakes. Maybe that ends up being a good strength, but it just seems like those are good things, but there's so many agents that are just kind of overwhelming with their strength that it feels hard to see him having a spot.
I agree. And then finally, I almost forgot because somehow she didn't make it onto my little list here, is Killjoy, who I'm glad I'm catching. Like, wait a minute, we didn't talk about Killjoy. I actually don't have her changes in front of me.
No, I don't think she had any changes at all. I know her cost changes are definitely not there. She is one of the few agents that did not have a cost change. Still relatively cheap at what is it, 600? So that's the cheapest of any agent, tied with several others, but it is that lowest tier, right? I mean, really, it's just going to come down to how are Sentinels impacted by potential meta changes? That's really what's going to dictate what's up with Killjoy. I think that she is helpful in pistol rounds because you feel comfortable on a lot of pistol rounds, not buying anything of your own as Killjoy, or buying maybe one piece of util, just buying one alarm bot or one molly, and then and relying on your free turret, obviously, and then purchasing a frenzy or a ghost for someone else on your team that can buy armor. So imagine we were talking about Reyna before. You buy her ghost, you buy yourself your alarm bot, she buys a flash and her armor, and you have like a crazy raid boss in pistol round, which I think will genuinely be a strength because so many characters have such awkward buys on pistol round now that having someone that's willing to give up a lot of their money on pistol round to make one character on your team into a raid boss, I genuinely think will be done by every team in like 2 or 3 weeks. I think everyone will be doing that. And I think Killjoy is one of those really good zero eco on pistol types of agents, so she can enable that.
Yeah, I think in due time we'll see how does she play with KO. I think if playing on a site and playing very reactive in space is incredibly dangerous, it will hurt her a lot. She doesn't like to play for retake like Cypher, and Astra suck nerf affects her a little bit. But yeah, I think a lot of it just depends on how kind of oppressive does KO end up being on taking space. We'll find out.
Her ult doesn't give a fuck about anything
That's
KO
true.
does.
That's nice. That is really nice.
Is important to talk about. So her ult retains a lot of strength.
All right, guys, we are back. Had a nice little break. And we it's been a long episode. There's a lot to talk about here. We've gone through all the changes to agents, the KO changes, the econ changes, and I think it's time for us to try to encapsulate that all and hit some broad brush predictions on where we think the meta will end up. As a quick point of conversation, the first qualifier for VCT Stage 3 here that's coming up, that leads teams to qualify to Berlin, at least in North America, and I'm pretty sure Europe, will be, definitely Europe, will be on the new patch, but without KO. So we're going to save some time here and not get too into breaking down a meta that we'll see for the next 2 weeks, except to make an interesting point that, you'll see teams playing on a new patch that was bounced around an agent without that agent in it. It will be very peculiar. The meta might look very different than what we expect it to be long-term. And I think there will probably be a mix, I would say, I'm curious your thoughts, Stream, of teams who are just trying to optimize exactly for that meta compared to teams who probably want to practice the larger run of things, since immediately after this first open qualifier, we're going to see KO come into play. And I think especially teams that are really confident in their level of competition in their region probably feel a little more secure preparing for the longer run of the closed qualifiers to make sure they go to Berlin.
Yeah, I think it really depends on where the different teams see themselves in like the ranking in their region, right? Because it depends, like, do we want to try and gamble on and how good they are at the current meta, right? Because if they're good at the current meta and they feel like it's going to be hard for them to normally qualify, then this could be a really good time for them to qualify, because a lot of teams are probably going to be focused on what the meta will be going forward, rather than what the remnants of the old meta are on this patch, right? There's also the thing to factor in, which is the rumors are, I don't know that this has been announced, but I've seen team lists from multiple regions of teams getting invited to the closed qualifiers. The top 8 teams in various regions getting a direct invite and not having to play through the open qualifier, which would mean those teams will obviously not be scrimming on the patch with no KO. So that can impact who comes out playing what. And if teams think that they'll have a relatively easy path through open qualifier, they'll probably be focused on what they expect to be playing in the closed qualifier, right? So I think you're going to see teams playing a variety of different styles and kind of gradients within the transition between those styles based on where they see themselves in the hierarchy in their scene and what kind of opportunity they think this single qualifier on this kind of weird patch what kind of opportunities that gives them.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to say what will be best or what will work the best, because it's going to come down to what teams are playing to their comfort, what teams are like pushing past. Like it's not even going to really tell us what's best, even if we look at what happens, right?
I agree.
So it's just a weird situation.
Yeah. I definitely think it is going to be a really weird mix of comfort, playing for the long run, playing for the short term. Depends on the team's position in the ecosystem of their region. And yeah, I totally agree. It's not. I don't think it's going to end up being super informative about the long-term meta, except like, oh, okay, this one agent like obviously looks really powerful. Like, wow, Skye's pop flash has worked really well. Like, I mean, that's great to know. But other than that,
yeah, I don't even think it's going to be informative of what is the best in the short-term meta. Yeah. I think it's going to be more about the best teams are going to play what they like, and that's just going to look the best.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely agree. But the larger topic is, where do we see the game going with KO? I guess I'll like start with, I think we were in a place where teams wanted to basically, we had a meta before Astra, right? That was very poppy. You launch a recon and a paranoia and a jet dash all at the same time and kind of flood into space. It was really hard to quickly react to it. I felt that created a pretty aggressive kind of poppy meta. Teams played for retake a lot. Basically, teams didn't want to be the ones holding space reactively. They wanted to either be aggressing space or giving up space so they can later aggress it. Stall tools kind of counterbalance this. If you have quick stall tools like the Astra suck, I think that's still in the game and it's still going to be a solid option. I also think that, the suppress is a really terrifying tool to have used on you first and not be prepared to react. But I also think it's interesting. It's an 8-second window, so it really, you could throw a paranoia as you get suppressed, but after that paranoia is over, you're still suppressed. The other team is unblinded. They still have some window of time where they can take space. It's strange to me. There's alts like KO that just are so oppressive on taking a site, whether it's execute or retake, that it makes me speculate that the game will be more retake meta. But at the same time, this, tools like the KO knife, you can throw your own back, and it makes it so the team trying to execute with the knife is going to have a really hard time. I do feel the game used to be more about trying to gamble what sides of the map you're aggressing or playing for and risking leaning retake on the other side. And Astra sucks were so spread out, and we started to see this more natural state of the, more TAC FPS traditional setup where teams were playing more for both sites and kind of defending, just more drawn out rounds. I feel as though the game's probably going to move more toward gambling which site you're trying to stall and defend and which site you're either retaking or aggressing out of. Probably, in my opinion, more big kind of team fight vibe, big grouped fights, and just more options for fast rounds. But it's interesting because there's, key signature parts of this Astra meta were very long, drawn out rounds with lots of utility trading. There's less utility. It's more expensive. So maybe it helps defenders. What are your general thoughts?
So I feel like where I expect this patch to go reminds me a lot of patches in Overwatch, actually, where you can see the core idea of different comps being good in different situations, and it's not super clear which one is the best across the board. And what ends up determining which comp is good is just the map geometry, what map you are on. And it seems to me that the very good Viper maps are not going to be maps where you're going to play a super explosive style, right? We've already talked about Bind being an example of that. I don't think there will ever be a time where you play super explosive on Icebox, just because of how that map works and how you don't have the space to play explosive. You have to be a little more methodical. Even when you're 5-manning a site, you don't get to pop it the same way you can on other maps. And I think Split, I think it is not easy, even with a KO knife, to just hard hit a site and hard exec a site on Split because of the map design, because of how choke heavy it is, and because aren't going to be able to knife Heaven and Sight, because Heaven and Sight on both sites are very far from each other. So you're not going to get that really high value knife. You're not going to be able to hit the whole site with that. So I think on those maps, you'll still see a decent amount of stall. You'll still see less emphasis on just playing full retake on some sites, while teams are hard hitting sites and both sides are soft gambling, right? But on sites like Haven, where it's very difficult to play Stolly on defense with all three sites, and Viper isn't even a super strong pick overall, in my opinion, I think that you will see a lot more explosive play, a lot more playing retake, right? I mean, especially again, three sites on defense.
Definitely.
In this in a KO meta, you are not going to play on all three sites. Yeah. You kind of could do that in the old patch. Have like, you know, 2A, 1C, 1 garage kind of floating, and 1B kind of in certain situations, but it definitely was not common, right? But you know, I think Ascent will be the same thing. You're probably gonna play for one site heavily, and then to be able to contest mid, so if they go to the other site, they can't get a free split on you and get all the map control, but you play pretty retakey on that site, right? That's my expectation there. And on Breeze, I think it's just hard to play Stolly in general on that map, because it's so big, because it's so easy to do splits, because a lot of the chokes aren't quite as small, and the dual angles you have to do if you're playing on site, if they are doing a split, are just so hard to deal with on both sides. Straight up just 90-degree angles cutting into the site. So I think that I really think that it's going to be a very map dependent meta, and I think we're going to see more emphasis than ever on map pool and map draft. And I think the changes to the map draft for the open qualifier are good. I actually like the format for the open qualifier, for how they're doing BO3s. How they have announced they will be doing the map draft for the closed qualifier is genuinely atrocious, and everyone involved should be ashamed. I truly hate it. For those that don't know, it kind of starts out normally. One team bans, the other team bans, one team picks a map, the other team picks the side of that map, then the other team picks their map, and then, you know, the first team picks a side on that map. And the way the third map is determined in the closed qualifier is at the start of the event, all the teams vote on what they want the third map to be for the entire event. And then whichever map gets the most votes is the third map for the whole event. And the higher seed just gets to pick which side they are on the third map.
Yeah, that is wild.
That's so stupid. Especially in a meta that is going to be so map centric. This is the worst time for them to make that kind of a change, in my opinion. But I think it will be really cool to see in the open qualifier. Sadly, we won't see KO, so it won't be that indicative. And then once we do get KO, we have this weird map thing. But I think we will see that come to fruition, because there are going to be some teams that are better at doing those heavy exec styles, those retake styles, and there are going to be some teams that are better at stalling. And we're going to see that heavily influence who does well in the closed qualifier, because map 3 is going to be one or the other. There aren't really maps that are kind of both. So I think that's really interesting. I do think teams with really good fundamentals are just going to be at a big advantage, because regardless of the meta, if you're good at knowing what fights you need to take, what areas of the map you want to fight for, playing off of your teammates, doing all that stuff consistently, you're going to be able to overcome weird issues with a developing meta, right? So I think Sentinels is in a really, really good spot. I think they'll be able to play both metas fine, and they have the fundamentals, so it doesn't really matter. I think 100 Thieves is going to be fine, assuming they don't have issues with role swap stuff that might trip them up, right? I think C9 is going to be fine, because they couldn't even play the stall meta anyways. So I think that's generally how I see it playing out.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good overall point that the meta is likely to be map centric. I think you can kind of look at what abilities you think will be most defining in a meta. Obviously, in the past meta, it was okay. This Astra suck is crazy. Like obviously the concept over stars, but really the core piece being the suck is everywhere, and it stalls and it does all these things. And it didn't. Astra didn't show up on Icebox, and while she's pickable on Breeze, and we're not basing this on pro play, but I've played Breeze scrims and played Breeze. I don't think her suck is like super defining as this oppressive map control stall tool on Breeze either.
Yeah.
But on the other 4 maps, really, I think it saw a ton of value, and it didn't really. The chokes were all the same size on all the maps, and she had enough stars to cover all the chokes on all the maps. And other than maps like Haven, where the early map control aspect of it got pushed to an extreme, I think the core defensive part of sucks affecting the pace of the game affected all these maps. But for me, it's not as maybe. I think KO looks more busted than Astra did, but I'm not sure if his kit is as overall impactful to the entire pace of the game round by round or not. But when I try to pick an ability like Suck, okay, what's the most impactful and meta-defining ability here? I'm going to go with the knife. And at least if you look at, okay, using the knife on attack to take space, yeah, it's very distinct between map. It's not these sucks cover these chokes on most of the maps. It's if you're throwing a knife at either of the Haven, either of the Ascent sites or all 3 of the Haven sites, I mean, it's covering so much of that space. I think it's going to be insanely hard to play on those sites, and it will be a very pre-Astra Omen looking retake, or you're aggressing kind of give and take space. Nobody wants to be standing somewhere when shit gets thrown at them. But definitely a map like Split, Bind's a fun one because I think B is a pretty crowded and small site, but A is pretty big. These are maps where you can throw this crazy ability, but there's enough room to play around that you can actually have responses to it. I do think that tool will still be a really centric part of the game. Maybe you're trying to hit the player who's set up to stall with it and force a utility out, or I think a lot of the time that when a team has an agenda to stall, it will likely be that the KO is ideally in a rotator position where if you are getting your Viper Molly or Suck off to stop them from busting out short A on bind, the hope is that if your KO is kind of rotating, that he will get there to knife if they want to re-hit, and so that they don't have the tools to kind of continue after your stall. Because the Suck, you would have a new Suck 12 seconds later. You would Suck, and then you'd Viper Molly, and hopefully you could Suck again. That window of time is now twice as long. So I think the new piece of stall, other than the Sage or Viper who's running out of their stuff to buy time, is going to be, if you smoke that choke and they have nothing to throw to get through it because they're all silenced, it's extra time. But I think it's harder for me to, it's not as obvious as an Astra. I think it's easy to predict which agents look really strong, but how will the pace of the game play? Yeah. I'm excited by the fact that it seems map specific and that there is it's kind of, I'm having a hard time pinning it down. I don't think it's just like, oh, the game was before Astra, just not for the whole time, but in the months before Astra, it was just totally like both teams wanted to attack space, and if you weren't attacking it, you were giving it up, and it was just this constant aggress retake motion between both teams. And I think for a really new player, it was kind of hard to understand the identity of attack and defense because it got really muddy. And then Astra really shifted that, and it looks like it might be more. Do you think there will be more of a push and pull in the game's pace
for sure
and those 2 identities than in the last 2 metas?
For sure. I mean, even in a stall comp, like on Bind, for example, or on Split, you should still run KO. He's still broken.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will still be able to fight aggressively for certain areas of space off his knife. His ult will still get you a sight for free on attack or defense. So I think he's still going to be run. So even in these stall comps, they aren't going to be as slow as they've been in the past. And I think, like we talked about, it really ends up depending on who KO is replacing in a traditional comp, not in a stall comp, right? I think you run KO Skye as a duo pretty much across the board, except for maybe Icebox, right? The question is, are KO Skye kind of taking up that initiator and flex role, or are they taking up that initiator and duelist role? And we still have that flex role open. That's the question we have to answer. If that role is being filled by a duelist, like a Jett, then we can see very high tempo, very aggressive plays, right? But if we're having them replaced by a breach that is playing for map control but not able to set his teammates up, right? Or if we're seeing it replaced by a Sage because we need some sort of stopping power, and Wall is really good even against a retake when you have the site, right? And she has a little bit of resistance to what KO wants to do, then that will change things. So I think the big thing we're going to find out is on these non-Viper maps, how intense is this shift? Because I think on those maps, it will be very aggressive. It will go very much back to how it was before, where you're going to fight aggressively for one area of the map and you're going to abandon the other area. Because if you aren't showing very strong numbers somewhere, you will get killed very easily, right? I think that will return on those maps. The question is just how extreme it will be, because will we find that an agent like Sage helps mitigate some of those issues? Do we feel like an agent like Cypher will help with retaking? And maybe if you have those agents together, you can deal with it a little better. It is unclear at this point, but I think that it could definitely go a couple different ways. But on the stall maps, it will be less intense stall than what we have been dealing with, certainly obviously because of the Astra changes, but also because of KO, and KO's I expect to be ubiquitous presence.
I agree definitely. And I think it's going to be tricky to predict this meta, but I do think some key points will be predictable, which is as utility becomes much more expensive, ecoing and forcing is going to be less viable and lower win percent, which for those watching, this means that winning pistol rounds is going to more severely, this is just a simple statement in my opinion, that winning pistols will more statistically impact your chance of winning the game. I also think that snowballing alt points through farming orbs or having a specific player farm kills in an anti-eco setting is something that's going to be easier to focus on if the other team is just classic saving. And in a meta where this KO ult is just probably the most crazy thing the game's seen, that will have a severe impact. I think it's possible we see a world where teams winning pistols can just snowball powerful ults so easily that the game is just... You could see pretty sweeping games where a team that wins both pistols, it's just kind of hard to fuck up winning the game at that point. I think
Skye being buffed really plays into that. We are a team that has been playing Skye for a while. We were definitely one of the really early adopters of Skye in NA, and I have been saying forever that her ability to charge her ult fast and chain her ults back to back is insane. There are many, many, many bonus rounds that we have won by using Skye ult. And if you win your bonus when eco has changed the way that it has, you win pistol in the other half, that should be an unlosable map.
And these are ults, like Skye ult, I think becomes so strong with KO knife, and these are ults that when you have them, honestly, almost on either half, but particularly on attack, you can just send it. You could just hit the button and go on a site, and a team that was down in ults isn't going to have had a chance to work a pick or grab an orb. It will be 5 seconds in, and you are throwing the fact that you have this ult and they don't into their face. I think it will be pretty easy to predict what's going to happen on a round where one or both teams have KO ult, because it's just oppressive. You just hit the button and go. I think it's possible that happens with Skye ult too, and it will just be... Yeah, you'll go into your bonus, you'll have Skye ult, you'll mash it and throw a knife where the squids are going, and you'll take the site and have a winning round, and then maybe the next gun round you have KO ult and they don't, and you just bully it with that. I think
I'm expecting a lot of saves in this
totally.
meta as well, because of how weak eco buys are, because of how expensive util is. That means keeping those guns matters way more, so you have enough money to buy your armor plus your util. So, I mean, I would not be surprised, like, if you're playing on site and you get hit by the Skye ult plus the knife, we get 2 kills, it's a 3v5, we have 2 of your rifles already, you're saving.
Yeah.
On your first gun against enemy bonus in a 3v5. That feels like trash, man.
Yep.
So, yeah, I definitely think the impact of pistol rounds is a lot higher with these changes. I definitely think saving at the right time is super important, and hunting kills to prevent those saves and to get your ult orbs on the right people is also going to be very important. So I think that even though we will see a shift back to a style that we are somewhat familiar with, that we've seen in the past on some of these maps, I think there will be some differences, because what was paired with those metas a lot of the time was not just aggression in pace in the server, but aggression eco-wise.
Yeah.
So early on, buying lots of ops and being really aggressive with your money and flexing that with your ops, right? Then force buying every round with a fucking stinger, right? And being aggressive with your economy. I do not think that unless you are very, very ahead, you're not going to be able to get away with that anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's going to make for games that I think the better team, or the team taking the pistols, is going to be more in control of games. You know, I've had people say Valorant is so random before. Obviously, it's not. That's a fucking ridiculous statement, but it can be really swingy, and I think this will probably be a less swingy meta in terms of what, you know. I mean, if both teams are great, but I think this meta is going to favor the favorite team more going into a series than previous, for that sense that if you get going, it's just
it's harder to mount a comeback. There's more ways to exert your advantages, right? So I think if a better team gets a lead, it's extremely hard for there to be a comeback. You're very unlikely to get a thrifty round, etc. But I do think that with the eco changes, pistols are much more volatile.
That's true.
So I think that is the one issue I have with this, is the impact of pistols is going up, and the predictability of pistols by team skill or team quality is going down, in my opinion.
Bet on teams where the players are known for being good aimers with pistols is probably a safe
or
technique for anyone who's placing their bets.
Teams that have like a very good player at being that pistol raid boss.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point.
I think that will end up being a big thing. Teams with one superstar that they can put a lot of oomph behind economically on their pistol round are going to be able to make up for other deficiencies. A lot, I think. But yeah, I think that it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to pistol being a little more coin flippy, because I do think that even though it is snowball-y, you have to be good at a lot of different elements of the game to take advantage of that hard snowball. So if you are a worse team, you're still going to have a pretty hard time snowballing that pistol win, in my opinion. But it will be doable. If you're the better team, you're not going to win pistols as consistently as you did before.
Absolutely. I think that's a very fair statement. And I think we hit the meta very nicely there. I think as closing thoughts, it'd be fun for us to talk about two kind of questions are for you and I, Dream. What regions do we see being strongest in this meta? Strongest in Berlin? And do you think that, I guess a good question to start is, do you think there will be more convergence of meta at Berlin than at Iceland? Because obviously at Iceland, a lot of teams just didn't touch the Astra meta, didn't believe in it. I think a lot of teams came in with a very defining identity of what their region thought meta was, and they've really had different takes on the game, in my opinion. Do we think now that teams have met up at LAN and realized, like, okay, maybe there's a style or two that really work well per certain meta, will we see most teams playing more similar to one another despite region at Berlin?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, despite my NA bias, I definitely don't think it's NA's the best region, so everyone's going to start copying NA. I think it just in general, across the scene as a whole, not just like the top of tier 1, the teams that could be going to Berlin, right? But also the teams that are towards the bottom of tier 1 in their respective regions, even tier 2 teams. It just raised everybody's awareness of the other regions and the quality of other regions.
Yes.
So I think that just means that people are going to be paying attention to other regions, taking more ideas from other regions. That's going to happen basically all around the world. And that's just naturally going to mean we're a little closer to each other stylistically. I definitely think there will still be differences, still probably somewhat significant differences, but I think it will be very rare that it ever gets as different as it was at Iceland, because all the regions were totally isolated for a fucking year. And that's never going to happen again.
It's a good point.
So I think that it will like necessarily be less different, but I think that's just more because of the cross-pollination than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That was the last time we ever have a year, hopefully, last time we ever have a year where regions aren't playing each other. And yeah, I think that, of course, I think NA is the best region. I'm biased, and it's a conversation for another podcast, but whatever, talent pool, blah, blah, blah. These are all arguments, and I think Sentinels look like the best team in Valorant beyond just meta, like in terms of players. But that's opinions that I don't need to get into because we're not trying to get at that. But in terms of, I also think NA came into Iceland really far ahead with an Astra meta that I believe was clearly the meta and pretty impressive if you weren't ready to play it. Although we saw some back and forth. Astra was kind of a weird agent to compound on top of the fact that these metas hadn't run into each other in a year, these regions, and it's really hard to get value out of Astra right away because she's a really quirky agent that impacts the whole team. It's hard to have a player who can play a really good Astra. If you're not playing against really good Astras, you don't know how good she is. There was a long amount of time in NA before it became obvious that Astra was oppressive. There was a solid month of teams scrimming each other and not having any idea how, conclusively how good she was. Obviously, if you look at our podcast, you can see we both thought she was going to be really good, but even, my team didn't end up playing her. And the early qualifiers, it was back and forth. I don't think that can be said about KO. I don't think this is some tough nut to crack that's hard to find. I mean, he's just this badass robot, and I think his floor is pretty low. It's not going to be hard to do that agent right and play him right. And finding your spot as a team in the meta, is it what maps do you want to play? How are you going to play those maps? There's some challenge here for teams to figure out, but I just don't see it being as hard to figure out as Astra is. And a lot of these changes are big, but they're not. I just don't think it's going to be as difficult for regions to end up at the same conclusion than it was with Astra.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's much stronger, but he is also much less like obtuse.
Yes.
Like obscure of an agent that it's like hard to figure out how to optimize and like where are the best. It's like this agent got a nade, got some old school flashes, and turns your abilities off. Like, it is very obvious how you can use this agent. It is very obvious how to build a play style around the agent. The question just becomes, again, is he filling the duelist role because he's just a better Phoenix? Or is he filling the flex role and you've got another duelist that he's working in conjunction with, right? That is going to be the big question. As far as regional strength in this type of meta, it is hard to imagine that if this is a hard exec, very setup heavy, and like have our same protocols, do things cleanly type of meta, that you don't look towards the teams that were very strong in that meta, which in my mind is Breach Jett type shit, which in my mind is obviously EU and Korea had the big advantages in those metas. We were never really big on Breach here in NA, so we never really got to flex those muscles. But it's entirely possible that because he functions very similarly to Phoenix and that NA has clearly already indicated that they are excited about integrating KO and using KO, that maybe committing to it means that NA won't have a disadvantage there. But I definitely think at the very least, EU and Korea, I expect to have a very good idea early on of how they want to use KO.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very fair statement. I think it will be more interesting to see how NA integrates it, and I'm excited that there's diversity between maps and in how you can use this new agent. And we're kind of saying, okay, probably a mix of kind of stall and pops. I think that a team will have to find their groove, but I think it's possible. Yeah, I think that this meta is going to be more diverse, and more of these regions can come in with their unique takes on the meta that are actually viable. Not like, haha, this is my unique take, which is that it's this meta and I'm wrong, which is, to be frank, how I felt about the Astra thing. I'm hopeful that in Berlin we'll see teams playing stylistically differently depending on the region, but they're actually within one meta.
Yeah, the same kind of core idea, but having takes on it.
Yes.
Not a totally different core idea that is definitely wrong.
Yeah.
Like I mean, yeah, well, it's Iceland is a story for another time, but it was definitely very surprising how many teams around the world were just not understanding Astra's strength, even with NA not hiding it at all in all of our events and our qualifiers leading up to it. Fnatic was one of the best teams in Europe at using Astra and used Astra more than most teams. I think that has a very big impact on their ability to perform at an event where Astra is hard meta. And I think it had a lot to do with their success at the event. Again, I think we won't see as much variance, but there clearly will be some. I think our hope that it will be the core KO meta and just different twists on how to execute it. I am pretty optimistic that that will actually be the case, which makes me extremely hyped for Berlin.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. I couldn't have said it better. I think I'm hoping we see small tuning, but we talked about this before the cast. We both kind of agree that even if there's small tuning or maybe they throw a Yoru rework in there, we don't think there's going to be some big sweeping change or super hard nerf to a core agent like KO. I would be surprised if Riot attempts to heavily or even accidentally heavily shifts the meta in the middle of this lead up to Berlin. So other than tuning changes, you know, we both feel that way, and I'm hopeful. I think KO's crazy and oppressive, and it's a little frustrating to me, and I hope he gets tuned down. But ignoring my feelings about the strength of his abilities and kind of the fact that it looks like there's not a lot of interactivity, I do think this meta looks to be like it's going to be pretty diverse and healthy in terms of options. And yeah, it'll be very, very exciting to see whether we're right or not. Can we go 2 for 2?
We can.
Yeah, I like the confidence. I feel it too. All right, well, I think we covered it well. It was a long episode, but it's a big patch. And
Valorant 2.
Yep, we're Valorant 2 launching June 22nd at 9 a.m. Pacific. And this podcast will likely come out right after that. So I hope it was insightful to all you viewers. Thank you for hanging out with us, bearing with us as we get real deep on it. But that's what it takes. That's what it takes to be geniuses about a meta. No, just kidding. Anyway, any last words, Dream? Any shout-outs?
Just shout out to Riot for having a good attitude of wanting to change the game, responding to pros, having creative takes. They're doing the Riot thing of releasing overtuned characters because it makes money, whatever. That's not the worst thing your dev can do. I'm pretty happy with Riot, their tournament support, whatever. Thank you for making all this possible. And thanks to you for having me on the podcast, man.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on, Dream. I would love to have you back on soon. We'll talk more meta. We got to keep doing this, keep our streak going. Good luck in Game Changers. Good luck in VCT.
Thank you.
And
you as well.
We will see you soon.